The morning of the 6th of June began with a report that should have been routine. A small patrol from the 3rd Battalion of the Royal Australian Regiment was moving through the Binbar area when it came under fire. The contact was sharp, localized, and immediately signaled that something larger than a handful of Viet Cong irregulars was taking a speculative shot at a passing patrol. The volume of fire, its accuracy, and the disciplined nature of the initial burst told the Australians within minutes that they were facing organized NVA regular forces positioned inside the village itself. The message went back to Nui Dat, and the response was processed with remarkable speed and clarity. Australian commanders assessed the situation with a precision that distinguished their leadership during the Vietnam War from some of the more catastrophic decision-making characterizing American operations in the same theater. They looked at the village. They saw what was in it. They understood what the enemy expected them to do, and they made a completely different choice. The infantry would not advance alone. The tanks were coming. The 1st Armoured Regiment of the Royal Australian Armoured Corps was equipped with the Centurion Mark V, a British main battle tank designed in the final years of the Second World War and refined through the Korean conflict into one of the most capable and survivable armored vehicles then in service with any Western army. The Centurion was not a light reconnaissance vehicle or a lightly armored infantry support machine. It weighed 52 tons in combat configuration, powered by a Rolls-Royce Meteor engine producing approximately 650 horsepower. Its main armament, the Royal Ordnance QF 84mm gun, could punch through the armor of virtually any tank it was likely to encounter and, as the defenders of Binbar were about to discover, demolish an entire section of brick wall and everything behind it with a single round. Centurions had already proven their value in Vietnam. Australian tankers had operated in Phu Thi Province since 1968, developing a tactical philosophy both pragmatic and brutally effective. They accounted for heat, jungle, narrow tracks, monsoon mud, all factored into operational doctrine. But Binbar represented something new. This was urban combat, close-quarters street fighting, the kind of environment where conventional military wisdom had always held that armor was vulnerable, unwieldy, and better kept on the perimeter while infantry did the hard work inside. The North Vietnamese commanders inside Binbar had almost certainly read the same doctrine. They positioned RPG teams at angles calculated to engage armored vehicles in narrow streets, preparing anti-tank positions to halt any competent tanker adhering to textbook tactics. The Australians did not follow that textbook. They understood it perfectly and decided it was wrong. Their tactical innovation was simple yet revolutionary. A solid brick wall, no matter how many soldiers sheltered behind it, could not stop a 52-ton Centurion moving at speed. Orders to the crews were straightforward. Identify a building occupied by enemy forces, drive directly at it at maximum safe speed, penetrate the front wall, bring the main gun to bear inside, fire, and exit through the rear wall. The enemy had prepared for everything except the building itself, turning their fortifications into a weapon used against them. The first tank to execute this tactic on the 6th of June created a psychological shock among the NVA garrison that no conventional military action could have produced. The sight and sound of a 52-ton vehicle demolishing a solid brick wall, engine roaring, tracks grinding inside what had been considered impregnable, was something no amount of ideological commitment or professional training had prepared them to process. The noise alone was extraordinary, the crack and cascade of collapsing masonry, the mechanical thunder of the engine at high revs, the grinding of track plates across rubble-covered floors. All of it unfolded in roughly the time it takes to load and aim a main gun, followed by the discharge of the 84mm weapon inside the enclosed space. The physics of the situation compounded the devastation. A main tank gun round detonating inside a brick building produced a concussive wave that could not dissipate. Every surface reflected it. Pressure inside the structure in the milliseconds following detonation reached levels physiologically unlivable for anyone in the room, and structural damage was catastrophic and instantaneous. Then the tank reversed or turned on its tracks and exited through the wall it had entered, or in some cases, through the rear wall, leaving behind a structure that was no longer a fortification, no longer a shelter, only rubble and dust. The Australian infantry, advancing close behind the tanks and using them as moving shields, was then required only to ensure nothing in the debris required further attention, a far safer task than clearing the same position room by room. As the first hours of the battle unfolded, the larger significance became clear. The entire defensive architecture of the NVA garrison at Binbar had been built on a single assumption: the attackers would use the streets. Every machine gun, RPG position, sniper post, fallback route, and communication channel depended on that geometric logic. Once Australian tanks began moving through the buildings on either side of the streets, the entire defensive network collapsed, not because it had been directly attacked, but because the very rules on which it depended had been invalidated. Firing positions covering one street became irrelevant when the threat came through a wall 3 meters to the left. Communication routes between buildings became death traps when those buildings were no longer safe. Military historians analyzing Binbar consistently note this quality of the Australian response. The most effective way to defeat a prepared defensive position is not to assault it directly, but to make it irrelevant. The NVA had built a trap. The Australians walked around it through the walls. The fighting was intense and chaotic, marked by close-quarters violence testing the discipline and cohesion of every unit. Centurions did not operate without risk. RPG teams managed to fire on several vehicles during the engagement. While the Centurions' armor could absorb hits that would destroy lighter vehicles, crews experienced the physical impact. Tracks were damaged, vision systems degraded, and coordination between tank crews and infantry in close proximity required constant adjustment as the battle progressed through different village sectors. The 3rd Battalion of the Royal Australian Regiment displayed combat discipline that had earned Australian soldiers respect and fear from enemies across conflicts from Gallipoli through Tobruk and Kakakota. Moving in close formation behind tanks, using smoke, dust, and rubble for concealment, they cleared positions methodically, reflecting both intensive training and cold-blooded focus. There were no heroic charges, no acts of individual bravado, only steady, professional, coordinated force applied precisely where and when it mattered. By the evening of the 6th of June, Australian forces had cleared the central sector of the village, inflicting casualties that made continued organized resistance increasingly difficult. But the battle was not over. The following morning brought a complication. Reinforcements from the 33rd NVA Regiment attempted to enter Binbar from the north through rubber plantations bordering the village. The Australian cordon aimed to prevent reinforcements or escape, but the terrain and darkness created uncertainty. What followed were a series of engagements in the plantations and on approaches to the village, demonstrating again the Australians' capacity to adapt tactical responses under changing circumstances. Centurions proved formidable even in broken ground and plantation rows, engaging infantry with main gunfire and coaxial machine guns in pre-dawn darkness. Reinforcing NVA forces failed to reach the village in strength. By the afternoon of the 7th of June, 1969, the Battle of Binbar was effectively concluded. The 33rd NVA Regiment's occupation was terminated. Their carefully prepared defensive network, dismantled not overcome at great cost, but made structurally irrelevant by a tactical approach refusing to fight on the enemy's terms. Australian forces suffered one fatality: Corporal Ron Newbold, age 23. NVA casualties exceeded 60, with many more wounded. This disparity was no coincidence. It was the result of tactical thinking that refused to accept the premise the enemy had designed and instead redesigned the battle entirely. Binbar was not a spectacular airborne assault, nor a brilliant strategic maneuver changing the war's course. It was, in the context of Vietnam, a relatively small engagement over roughly 48 hours. It was quickly overshadowed by larger events. The American military barely registered it. The international press barely noticed. Yet for those studying urban warfare mechanics, it remains a textbook case, not metaphorical, but literally documented in military training curricula, demonstrating how tactical innovation at the unit level can produce results disproportionate to resources involved. The decision to use Centurion tanks as primary assault vehicles moving through buildings rather than perimeter fire support did not exist in doctrine before Binbar. It emerged from a ground-level assessment, a willingness to discard conventional wisdom and invent a new solution on the spot. The tactical legacy of Binbar was recognized immediately within the Australian military. After-action reports circulated through the Royal Australian Armoured Corps and Royal Australian Regiment as analysis and training material. Using armour in close coordination with infantry in urban environments, with tanks acting as literal assault vehicles, became part of combined arms doctrine, influencing Australian military training for years. The battle also contributed to the development of the combined arms team concept. Armour, infantry, combat engineers, and supporting arms operating fully integrated rather than compartmentalized. Lessons from Binbar and other engagements in Fudi Province, where Australian commanders refused to adopt American operational methods wholesale, directly shaped this evolution. The enemy had built their position based on a predictive model of Allied behavior. The attacker would use streets. They would enter through doors and windows. They would take significant casualties, eventually forced to halt or withdraw. It had worked before in Korea, the Pacific, and previous engagements in Vietnam. The Australians at Binbar refused to accept it. They declined politely, with extreme prejudice, at approximately 52 tons per polite declination. That refusal is characteristically Australian, not flag-waving or triumphalism, but a historical tendency to distrust received wisdom, question conventional approaches, and substitute improvised solutions grounded in practical assessment of actual conditions rather than theoretical models from other contexts. It worked at Binbar decisively, efficiently, and at extraordinarily low cost in Australian lives relative to the engagement's scale. The Centurion tanks had already amassed remarkable service history. Designed in the final months of the Second World War, entering service too late to see combat, they proved themselves in Korea against Soviet-supplied T-34 tanks during the Battle of the Imjin River in April 1951, buying time for UN forces. Australia acquired Centurions in the early 1950s. By Vietnam 1968, they had been substantially updated. The Mark V variant featured improved fire control, upgraded engine cooling for tropical conditions, and modifications reflecting counterinsurgency needs. Crews were experienced, understanding tank capabilities and limitations, including its ability to demolish brick structures, based on practical experience rather than theory. The combination of capable equipment and experienced crews under commanders willing to apply both unconventionally formed the foundation of Binbar's tactical innovation. These were institutional capabilities expressed in specific circumstances, not spontaneous genius. The village of Binbar was rebuilt slowly after the battle. Colonial brick buildings forming the NVA's backbone were mostly beyond reconstruction. Residents returned to a community substantially altered. Australia's involvement in Vietnam continued for 3 more years, winding down as political sentiment shifted. The last combat troops left in late 1971, final personnel withdrawn mid-1972. The war continued nearly 3 more years until the fall of Saigon in April 1975. None of this diminishes Binbar. It was not a strategic turning point, but it was a clear, documented demonstration of rigorous military thinking applied to a specific problem, rather than defaulting to solutions from other contexts. In decades since, the Battle of Binbar has gained recognition within Australian military historiography, if not the wider public. Veterans have spoken in documentaries and oral histories. The 1st Armoured Regiment and 3rd Battalion RA commemorate the battle in unit histories and annual events. Academic historians cited in analyses of combined arms tactics and urban warfare doctrine. In 2007, the Australian Army officially recognized the battle with a battle honour. Outside Australia, it remains obscure, largely absent from popular culture, Hollywood films, American high schools, and political discussions. Yet it exists in meticulous documentation within Australian war memorial archives and regimental histories. Whether that obscurity matters depends on one's view of history. If history is a record of strategic events shaping subsequent developments, Binbar's obscurity is understandable. If history is also about human ingenuity, refusal to accept the terms of a problem, and the willingness to reimagine those terms from first principles, then Binbar deserves a much larger audience. 52 tons of steel through a brick wall. One Australian life paid for a fortified village cleared against a professional garrison. The enemy's perfect trap rendered meaningless by men who looked at it, understood it, and chose to destroy it with the simple, magnificent expedient of driving a tank through the building it was supposed to protect. That is the Battle of Binbar. That is what Australian soldiers did on the 6th and 7th of June 1969 in a Footy province village, largely forgotten by the wider world but never forgotten by those who fought there. The NVA commanders were professionals, intelligent, experienced, correctly analyzing the situation and predicting Allied behavior. They had simply never met anyone who brought a centurion to a house.